Hello there, Section 24. It is November 14th. It's Monday evening on my farm. And I hope this brief video finds you well and safe. Our first snow hit today, and I got editorial comments about that. You know, we have this concept, it's kind of a new one, called distracted driving. And it's dangerous. And we're not supposed to pick up our phone and get distracted by it when we're going down the road. My crap analog tonight is that today I kind of was engaged in what I've historically called distracted teaching. In other words, I'm trying to teach and I'm trying to do a good job serving my classes live. But I got a poet coming in, and I'm picking up Chris Abani tomorrow at the big airport, and he is on my mind. And so is everything that could go right or wrong with a big literary event, a historical event as far as I'm concerned. Hope you come. Again, repeating myself. Poetry reading is at noon on Wednesday. You got to come early because it's going to be stuffed. Craft Talk will follow the book signing, and that's at 1:30, although I'm kind of semi-thinking of bumping that up to 1:20, so a couple of high schools can stay. So you're not going to see me for the rest of the week because I've only got 2 lessons for my Comp 1s, and that might make some of you happy. Wednesday, I've obviously got administrative leave, so I can host that poet. So you're not going to see me. I'm going to be in D2L tonight, meddling with your life, giving you some journal entries, and getting you ready. We've got to probably have a quiz here sometime soon. Don't worry, mine are easy. What was I going to say? You're not going to see me until the end of the week. And I hope you have a good one. And the next week, we've only got one day, Thanksgiving. And we've only got one day, at least I only have one day of teaching next week, Monday. And then it is Thanksgiving time. So here's what I got. I'm going to start with a very brief poem by Chris Abani, Dr. Abani. A second one from his book, Smoking the Bible. You'll remember this book is about 2 brothers, one elegizing the other. 2 brothers in conversation. And that's something I've never had in my life, which is a brother. Then I've got some things I want to tell you about The Great Gatsby, the novel. I got a couple things I want to tell you about F. Scott Fitzgerald. And also today in my classes, I talked a little bit more, delved a little bit further into reading theory. So let's start with a poem, and I also got a story I want to tell you about a very important student of mine. Chris Abani, Insomnia. And you, brother, do you roam the night too? See ghosts or your child's discarded toy? To slip through a sleepless house, fetid as breath from a spice-heavy dinner, a small leather-bound book of Psalms in Hebrew and English, handmade pages, facing the wrong way, like a life lived in regret. In that hush, I break Jerusalem into voice, prayer as relentless as the grit of sand in a shoe. This meditation is at once romance and sorrow, a stutter, a life fallen short. In the yard, rabbits track an insistent alphabet across pristine snow, the sky hollowed out by stars. Beautiful poem. The guy's really a fantastic writer. Can't wait to meet him. He'll be in my house tomorrow night. I'm going to give him linguine with clams. It's kind of the traditional poet feast, or it has been for a while. And I'd like all these troubles to go away so I could start having the big poet feast that I used to have here. We'd open up my glass porch, take all the furniture out, get big tables, and we've been doing that for years. And then the world changed, and we haven't been able to do that anymore. Fast story. I told my students today that when the first snow comes, and we got to be careful in Minnesota because we all forget how to drive at first, right? We forget the physics of it. Every time we get a first snow, at least in the last 13 years for me, I recall a student that I had my first year at Central Lakes College. It was January. It was a very cold day. And I looked up and I saw a woman coming into my old classroom in an electronic wheelchair. I had never seen such a thing in my life. Why is that? Because in my old life at St. John's Prep School, there was a private school that didn't have to be ADA compliant. And the school was built into a sharp hill, so there's many strata, 4 or 5 floors. And if you're in a wheelchair, you can't go to that high school. And I felt so excited and so privileged and lucky, fortunate to be able to finally serve someone that had accessibility issues. Now, this is 13 years ago, 13 winters ago. I can't fully summon her face and her name, but I became, really, she was my favorite. And what I loved about her is that she, even though she was in a wheelchair, and it was winter, she lived across the road there from the college in the North Apartments. She was never late to class. She never missed a class. And more than once, for some reason I used to park in the North lot, I'd pull up and she would be like trundling through snowdrifts, man, going over them with her wheelchair, being lashed by the wind and the snow. She was always smiling, always, never complained once. And I'm really sorry to report to you that she became ill that year. That February of that same year, just a few weeks after I declared her my favorite, she ended up with a blood disease and landed in the intensive care at the big hospital there in Brainerd. And I did something I've done before. I talked my way into that ICU, even though I'm not family. How did I do that? Well, that would be classical rhetorical theory. And I went in there, and it was rough. At a glance, I knew she wasn't going to make it. There was a boyfriend in that story. He was laying on the couch, snoring away. His snoring was louder than the ventilator machine, keeping her alive. There was a little boy in that story, too, a child. He was sitting on the floor, looking at me with wide eyes. And he didn't say a word, nor did I, but I did give him a cinnamon Altoid. And I grabbed her hand and tried to pray her back. And it didn't exactly work. I know all prayers are heard, but not all are answered, or at least answered in the way we want them to be answered. And she died a little while after that. And you're an asynchronous class. There's no need reading the riot act to you about leaving early and keeping an eye on the roads and checking D2L, because this is asynchronous. But I did let my students know that I wanted them, I don't want them to be dangerous, but if they're thinking about coming to school, drive safe and realize I want them to know that story about that long ago student of mine. And I need them to know I have an hour commute too, so I gotta cut through it with my half-ton truck. A few things about The Great Gatsby. I wish I had a physical copy of the book, but we can have a look at the cover here. Just a few things that I want you to know. I hope this is, it's on the PDF or the e-book that I sent you, but The Great Gatsby cover is very famous. It was a Art Deco painting, started as a sketch, a painting done by a Spanish guy named Francis Cugat, C-U-G-A-T. I'm probably brutally mispronouncing it. But this is momentous. This is historical because Cugat knew a little bit about what the novel was about after he got commissioned to do it. But when Gatsby saw, Great Gatsby, when F. Scott Fitzgerald saw this cover, he was so excited. And he went back to work on the novel. And what's kind of weird is that, not weird, it's wonderful. The painting so amazed him, so transformed him, that he decided to work that painting into the novel somehow. And in a little while, as you read this week, you need to get to 5 chapters by Friday, he worked in the metaphor of the eyes. Now, if you look at this, you can see that there's, like little naked ladies in the pupils, and this, there's a party going on, there's fireworks. This novel, this painting tried to capture the flavor of the novel, which really is a recording of an American mood. And that is where Fitzgerald got the idea for the amazing eyes of T.J. Eckelberg that are on that dilapidated, rotting billboard in the Valley of Ashes. And I wanted you to know that. Sad thing about the novel, it didn't sell. Fun thing to know about writers. In fact, most artists, we'll stick with writers for a second because that's what I understand. They don't tend to make a lot of money off their books. It's about commerce and it's a business, definitely. But I can assure you that Chris Abani is going to make more money with the speaking fee that I give him gratefully Wednesday than he's going to make off this book, royalty-wise. They just get a few pennies on the dollar. Poets make their money teaching and giving readings. So in the olden days, in fact still, you need a bestseller if you're going to see money off of it. The Great Gatsby did not sell. America was not interested. It sat on shelves in drugstores and bookstores around the country, and people picked it up and put it back down, probably because of that first page. It kind of sucks. It's boring. It doesn't really get going until you turn a few pages. You'll see. But the amazing thing is, Fitzgerald wanted to be rich in the worst way. He hung out with a class of people that he couldn't even really hang out with properly because he was broke all of his life. All of his life, spending his time writing to try to cover the sanitarium bills of his wife that I'll talk about. The amazing thing, The book got remaindered. Remaindered means the publisher collected all of them, and what happens is they take the books and they go back to the publishing house and they're put in a tremendous vat. Chemicals are put in, and just imagine giant egg beaters creating like a slurry that turns the former books, the almost books, into other books. Well, we know one thing for sure. Not too long after F. Scott Fitzgerald went face down on a typewriter in Hollywood, California, 43 years old, doesn't see his 44th birthday, I don't think. The novel, the country just picked it up and went, wait a minute, this is a great American novel. And it sold tens of millions of copies. And Fitzgerald did become wealthy, but it was after he was sleeping in the earth. We have a thing called posthumous fame. That's called posthumous wealth. He got rich a little bit too late. And that's kind of funny and sad at the same time. There's an irony there somewhere. Because it's a book about, among other things, it's a book about money. So we talked about the cover. We talked about the sales. Oh, there's two versions of the book. That's crazy. There's another version that preceded this one called The Gats that has a happy ending. And not that this is a sad book. Maybe I'll read it this time and Jake Gatsby will be okay. Maybe the stage won't be littered with bodies, but there are two versions, which means in some senses, as an English major would put it, this is an unstable text. It's not exactly stable. And I have not read The Gats. I'm not sure I ever would be interested in that. I like the book the way it is. Excuse me. Excuse me, I bet that's loud on my lavalier mic. What else was I going to say about that? It's not important. I was going to mention, copyright just recently ended on The Great Gatsby. Copyright, for some reason, in this country, in America, it's 95 years. 95 years, and you lose your intellectual property. It just kind of goes to the world and becomes, general, it's something we all own. That means a couple of things. It means one thing for sure. It means with no copyright, anybody can do anything they want with The Great Gatsby. You can have The Great Gatsby on ice. You can create Great Gatsby the musical. You don't need permission anymore. There's already, and probably was being written long before it came out, there's a version of it out called The Gay Gatsby. Well, if you'd written that before copyright popped, you would get sued for infringement. And I know a thing or two about that. And I only want to tell you one more thing about the book. Fitzgerald wanted to call this book Trimalchio's Party. Now that's a pretty obscure reference, and there's not a lot of English teachers that know what that is an allusion to. Well, I have read the Satyricon by Petronius, who was sort of the right-hand man or the minister of taste of an emperor named Nero, who was nuts. And the Satyricon is a very unpleasant sort of pre-novel, proto-novel, written long before novels existed. And it's a convoluted mess of a story about a rhetorician who travels all around Rome going to parties. It's a buddy story. The most horrific party that happens in the Satyricon happens at the house of a very wealthy man named Trimalchio. And we have parties in this novel, and they don't lead to anything good. And maybe we've talked about this. I've got a lot of young people in this course. I'd be very careful with partying and alcohol. I know I sound like a moralist there, but nobody accomplishes anything good when they're drunk. I wasn't planning to say this, but here I am saying it. Nobody drinks too much and wakes up the next morning and says, "Oh, I got so wasted last night, and then I made a bunch of low-income housing." That's not going to happen, ever. Just a few things about F. Scott Fitzgerald's life. I don't have, I've got really pretty serious Hemingway knowledge. I know more about Hemingway and William Faulkner than the average bear. We call F. Scott Fitzgerald, I know a thing or two about him. I've been teaching him for a long time. Here we're talking about one of our own. We're talking about a Minnesotan. F. Scott Fitzgerald grew up on Summit Avenue in St. Paul, Minnesota. He attended St. Paul Academy, and not a real remarkable story, biography-wise, nothing really vivid or riveting to tell you about his early life, but he grew up on Summit Avenue in quite a nice house, and his dad, after a while, fell on some evil days, and they had to move to the far end of Summit Avenue, if I'm recalling it correctly. Went to war. He wanted to go to war. He wanted to go fight the Kaiser like every American boy did. And you can see him here in his World War I outfit. The thing is, he never saw any action. He got on a ship in New York City and was getting ready to head overseas to Europe, had his little backpack and his helmet and his rifle. And while he was on that boat to New York City, from New York City, the armistice was declared, and it was the end of World War I, and his services were unnecessary. He fell in love with a woman named Zelda. Zelda was a Southern belle, and her dad did not like F. Scott Fitzgerald. She thought the idea of marrying a writer was a super bad one, and he forbid the courtship. He tried to put a stop to it. Well, kind of a Romeo and Juliet situation, isn't it? If you forbid two lovers from being together, well, they're all the more going to feel the flames of their passion inflamed. And kind of the legend of it, I hope it's not a mythology, I hope it's not apocryphal. When he got the word from New York City that they were going to publish his first novel at Scribner's, he drove all the way to her house from St. Paul and drove up on the lawn, kind of Pulp Fiction style, and yelled up to her room, "New York is going to publish my novel. Will you marry me?" She called, "Yes." And she came running down the stairs and entered into one of the worst marriages ever, worst literary marriage ever. Plates flying through the air. It was nothing but trouble. They were untrue to each other. She was an artist. She was not well in terms of mental health. Spent a lot of her time going in and out of hospitals. And like I already repeated, he wrote feverishly across his life, broke, trying to pay her sanitarium bills and later his daughter Scotty's bills. They had a girl named Scotty, a little girl, and he loved her. The father-daughter paradigm is one that I didn't have a dream come true on. Luckily, I lived the father-son paradigm, but they really loved each other, and I'm not going to bother to pluck it down. But up here, I've got sort of a 2-volume collection of letters written between fathers and sons. One collection are letters that went back and forth from F. Scott Fitzgerald to Scotty, and the other one is a copy of a collection of letters from Galileo Galilei and his daughter when he was imprisoned by my church for 15 years. Not a very good idea. Nor was the Spanish Inquisition, now that I think of it. Galileo, under house arrest for all those years, wrote a lot of letters back and forth with his daughter. And I pick those up and read them once in a while. Fitzgerald, terrible drinker, like Hemingway, like Faulkner, probably shortened his life more profoundly than theirs. Still became one of our greatest writers. And I should mention that he's the only writer of these people that I'm talking about that I adore so much, the giants that walk the earth. Fitzgerald went to college, went to Princeton, of all places, one of the most elite institutions that we have in this country. Unlike Faulkner and Hemingway. I'm misspeaking a little bit tonight. I must be a little bit tired. Stick with me. So he was an educated man, and I think I only want to show you one more photograph. English teachers don't talk enough about editors and how important they are. Now, when you hear the word editor, you might just think, okay, that's a proofreader. Everybody could use a proofreader that helps with usage and grammar and spelling and punctuation. And editors do a little bit of that, but it's far more than that. I know this because I know an editor, Jeff Schatz at Grey Wolf Press, who has been the editor of Grey Wolf and many of the poets that I brought for Verse Like Water. Tracy K. Smith, when I was dropping her off at the airport, she brought Jeff Schatz up in the most affectionate, glowing terms possible. She needed him to become a U.S. Poet Laureate here. And in the same way, these writers, to varying degrees, depended on the great Maxwell Perkins. The writer that depended on him the least was William Faulkner. Faulkner did not like to be edited or messed with. And I have studied the galleys of Light in August and other novels by Faulkner. And you can see him in the margins as they send the book back and forth. Faulkner's in the margins going, "Leave this alone, goddammit, leave this alone. Don't change this." Even when Perkins wanted to adjust a family name that he had misspelled incorrectly, Faulkner, he just wanted nothing to do with it. Fitzgerald was different. Fitzgerald was an obsessive editor. That's why we have 2 versions of the book. Maybe there's a 3rd one out there. He could not stop dithering with it and fixing it. And very often, Perkins' job was to tell him, you know, you're done. This chapter's done. This page is done. Just stop throwing yourself on the couch in grief and anguish after having spent a whole morning on a sentence or even a paragraph. And you just got to know that editors are huge in the literary world. And I hope you remember that, will you? One more thing today. I'm at the 20-minute mark, and I think I can stay shy of the 30-minute mark. I made these crap drawings the other day so I could have something to put up on the screen that would replicate, or at least be within striking range of replicating what I put on my blackboard. I got the biggest, most beautiful blackboard. That's one of the reasons I love E339. Recess cans, courtyard, and I hate whiteboards. I don't like those smelly markers. I like chalk. And that blackboard is fantastic. Maybe you'll take a live class from me someday. Maybe not. It's up to you. But I made this drawing the other day because I was trying to help you understand our relationships between readers and writers. We talked a little bit the other day about where meaning resides. It's a pretty important question. Is meaning reside in the book? Does it reside in the mind of the writer? Is it in the mind of the reader? Or somewhere in between? It's kind of somewhere in between, but I'll flesh that more out when I get back to you on Friday. Here's the main thing I want to tell you. I used a kid named Axel Johnson in my 10 o'clock class as an example. I said to the class, okay, look, when I picked up Axel's journal this weekend, Axel was just being Axel. And I read every word like he wrote it, one word at a time. And I wasn't being anything other than me. But when literature is going on, something a lot more complicated is going on with art. And you've all been taught this, and I don't want to throw your previous English teachers under the bus, but one of the standard things that we do in English classes, year after year after year, teachers, all of them, 55,000 high school English teachers, and fewer by the minute because everybody's leaving. We tell students, okay, in terms of narration, we have first person, second person, third person limited, and third person omniscient. It's way more complicated than that. I'm not saying that we have 8 billion narrators, but it's way more sophisticated and complicated than that. But here's the thing that you have to know. This time out, unlike the previous stories that we've had with Faulkner and Hemingway, we are in the presence of a first-person narrator. So we see that I on page 1. Although that page is boring to me, he's just getting going. He's almost deliberately being dull. We see the I, and he's talking in first person. But that's not, the thing is this, maybe you already know this. If this is really obvious, just forgive me. Here, we have a phenomena going on that we didn't with previous stories in this unit from midterm on when I took over this class, gently as I could. What's going on is we have an I. So what's happening is Fitzgerald, according to Wayne C. Booth, my hero, is sending forth an implied narrator. It's not a puppet show, but it is a persona. It's a voice that he's speaking through. And the voice is Nick Carraway. So the game is, wow, the writer can't disappear. Fitzgerald can't hide, because if he does, we don't have the book, we don't have the story. But what happens is he is speaking through Nick. And the challenge, the phenomena of it is, it's really a blast to try to figure out where Fitzgerald, the man, the writer, leaves off, and where does Nick Carraway pick up. He's there, Fitzgerald's there, along with little bits of Minnesota and the East, where the story takes place. But it's an implied writer. This is a little bit weird, but you also need to know that when we pick up a book, a story, a poem, observe a painting, look at a picture for the first or the 100th time, we send forth an implied reader that is kind of us, but kind of not us. And the only way I could explain this today was to draw little stick figures on the board and remind everybody in the room, this is the best way I can think of it, yes, you're a self. And yes, sorry, that's a little embarrassing. When you woke up this morning, you looked into the mirror. We all did. And then we said, well, there I am. But we are actually a succession of selves that gives way to selves, other versions of ourselves. And I used a kid named Bo, who I like to pick on, in my 10 o'clock class today. I said, Bo, okay, you're here today. This is November 14th, Bo. But when I say goodbye to you at Christmas, that's you in a few weeks. That's a future Bo. And I said, Bo, I'm super excited that you signed up for one of my Comp 2s, my live Comp 2s in the spring. I'll see you in January. But that's going to be a different bow, isn't it? That's a little bit further down the line bow. And in May, when I bid you farewell and I tell you to have a good summer, well, that's May bow, in the distant May of 2023. See the deal? You could pick up the book one day and have a headache and not like it. You could pick the book up a year later and say, wow, this is a great book. Why did I try reading this when I had a headache? Or you could change your mind about it. You could say to yourself, this is a great novel. And then later decide, you know what, I was wrong. It wasn't a great novel. The writer sends forth an implied writer. We send forth an implied reader. There's a delightful collision called literary art. And I love talking and thinking about this every day of my life. And I hope I get a few more years to keep doing this. Final thought. There are conscious and unconscious narrators in literature. There are writers that know that they're telling a story. They're aware of it all the time. I'm writing and you're reading me. We also have unconscious narrators, which I think are a little bit more complicated. These are writers that are telling a story, but they're not really addressing anyone in particular, which is how I feel when I pick up the first page of The Great Gatsby. Who are you talking to, man? It certainly isn't me. Nick Carraway, late in the novel, reveals that he's telling a story. But it comes way late in the novel. He writes something like, you know, I've been looking over some of these pages that I've been writing, and only then does he become cognizant of the idea that he's engaged in the human activity of writing. A more spectacular example is Huckleberry Finn. I'm sorry, I can't stop bringing that book up. Way late in the novel, also a first-person novel, Huckleberry turns to the reader when there's like 2 pages to go, and he says, you know, if I'd ever known how much trouble it was to make a book, I never would have started in on it. And I just love that little boy so much when he turns to the reader and lets us know that he's finally aware that he is a storyteller. At least think about coming to my poetry reading. I'll post up the link so you can attend it virtually or watch it later. Stay safe in the slick streets up there, Brainerd, and I'll be back at you Friday.